Hello, this is Sophotropic podcast.
Number
Episode-
two.
Yes, and my name is Helen.
My name is Mila.
My name's Glenn.
Great. So, we will. This week we're going to talk about belief systems, what they are and what they do, why are they important, and also talk about how they affect our lives. So, to start with, I want to just introduce the idea of belief systems and why are they important to our everyday lives. When people talk about beliefs, usually they think in terms of a religious doctrine or political belief system, but it's actually much more pervasive than that. I think that every one of us has a belief system that we use to navigate the world, to interpret the events of other people and external events, basically, and how to navigate this. And as in that respect, they actually form a filter through which we view our everyday lives. And so in that way, they literally shape our experience of being alive.
So, can you pick one of your beliefs?
Yeah, so one of the things that I recently realized about myself is that, so I started I started a new job recently, 2 weeks ago, actually 3 weeks now, and I had a very I really wanted to do a good job in this position as a manager, but during one of the meetings in the second week, there was a instance where I lost my cool, which I did not expect to happen, because I had very I really had nothing but good thoughts about the company and the position and the job. But something in that meeting, somebody said the word. So we're basically this is a scenario. In the meeting, one of my engineers stayed up all night and try to work around a server issue. And the server person responsible for it had sent out a change about 5 p.m. the night before. So as far as he was concerned, that's fine. He sent out a change. People should be able to deal with that. And I thought it was. So when I challenged him about this, he came back with, "Well, it's a startup. What do you expect?" And at that point, before I even realized it, I was ranting. I was sputtering and saying things like, "I've never worked in a place like this," and just really, I didn't really want to do that. But something inside of me took over and had an emotional reaction. So afterwards, I thought about this instance a lot, and I realized that I actually had a deep-seated belief about people who are intelligent, in that I believed that people who are intelligent are intolerant of people who are not. Now, as a and so my action basically was based on that belief. When I see someone acting incompetent or in a way that I perceive as less intelligent than me, I, based on my self-image and this belief that intelligent people are intolerant of people who are not, I acted immediately in accordance to that belief and reacted. And this action makes no sense rationally, but it made sense in the context of a belief system that I had, that I wasn't even aware of at the time. This is the kind of thing that I think it's what this search is all about. It's finding out our own behaviors that are inconsistent with our own irrational self-interest.
Belief is your reaction to the event, right? It's not the event itself, it's your reaction to the event, right?
Belief is your interpretation of the
right,
event.
yeah. So, but the second important component is that you have to have emotional reaction in order for the belief to work, right? Something happened a long time ago, and in the moment we decided, and make conclusion about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was, asked my mom to give me a candy, and she suddenly started being angry and get me out of the room and was yelling at me. So while as the child, I don't know really what she was reacting. Maybe she just had a bad day. But in the moment that child decides that, I shouldn't bother my mom when she, I don't need her at all. Every time, I ask her, she makes such a fuss and it punishes me, and, I'm fine on my own. So this sort of belief that you're not quite aware, you cannot be, you can have this belief of, I don't need people to be happy, I'm fine with my own. So it's coming from childhood. But because we have this emotional reaction attached to it, it hurt us deeply, right, in the moment, that's what supports this belief. And every time you experience this belief, it's sort of like an experience of suffering, and because you think you're getting something out of it, but in fact all you're getting is misery. So where do you think this belief of yours come from?
Had a lot to do with my parents, who placed intelligence or analytical intelligence as the highest and probably the only thing that matters in the evaluation of a person. And combine that with so I started unconsciously look for ways to please them in terms of exhibiting intelligent behavior. And then I guess I picked up somewhere else, possibly from a book I read or some movie I watched, where intelligent person in a movie can sometimes be portrayed as an impatient genius, doesn't suffer fools, that kind of thing. And I made the connection and started behaving the same way.
Kind of reminds me of there's a division in, I guess you'd call it, rational choice theory. So orthodox rational choice theory assumes that rationality, as far as it goes, is instrumental, which just means it's like a tool. You want something and you believe some other things, and reason helps you to figure out what to do to get you what you want. So, it's very goal-directed, how to achieve your goals. There's another view of what rationality is about that's called expressive rationality. And it doesn't have to be either or, right? Expressive rationality might be an add-on to instrumental rationality. But the way it works is at least one part of what you're doing when you act is you're expressing your own values. You're kind of communicating to other people and maybe yourself, what you think is important or what kind of person you think you are and that sort of thing. So the reason I was reminded of that was, you said your own behavior was irrational, and if you think of it in terms of achieve your goals, whatever they were in the meeting, of course, you're not going to get there by, say, yelling at people and saying, no, this place is terrible. But if you think about it in terms of expressive rationality, then it starts to make sense, right? You think of yourself as a certain type of person, and you have certain beliefs about how that type of person behaves, and so you're following through with those beliefs, right? Expressing your values or the kind of person you think you are through your actions, which in this case sort of involve yelling at people. So I suppose if you're going to take that sort of view that, part of what we're doing when we're acting is expressing our own values, not necessarily our beliefs, right, but our own values, the kind of person we want to be, then you might take the view, well, we should stop doing that, right, and just focus on what our goals are. Or you might take the view that, well, you can't sort of separate the values and the beliefs. You've got to get the values straight as well, because you're going to be acting on those, and adopt a set of values that are conducive to the sort of behavior that you really want.
Talk a bit more about the difference between beliefs and value.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a complicated question, right? Hume famously sort of drew a sharp line between the two. He didn't really talk about value so much as desire. There's desire on one side, those are the things you want. That's the way you want the world to be. And then there's belief on the other side, that's the way you think the world is. And that's very much the way that the orthodox theory of rational choice works, and this is what economists use. If you're going to model an agent, you're going to describe an agent and then predict what he's going to do, then he has a set of desires, that's the way he wants the world to be, and then he has a set of beliefs, and that's the way he thinks the world is, and then he will rationally, consider what he can do to move the world from the way it is to the way he wants it to be.
Right.
And that'll predict his actions, right? He'll select the most efficient way to get from one to the other. So then there is this whole other sort of school of thought which has a sort of more complicated view of what action is about, where it's not just about getting from how you think things are to where you want them to be. It's also about the type of person or the values that you have and your beliefs about how that kind of person behaves, or what that type of person would do. So in that case, your actions aren't necessarily goal-directed at all. You're not trying to change the world. You're sort of trying to tell other people in the world something about yourself.
Right.
And, economists have a story about that too. It's sort of signaling, and that's really a way of influencing other people so that you will move the world in the direction you want it to move. So it fits into the orthodox economic view as well. But from the expressive side, it's really not about achieving a goal at all. A certain aspect of our behavior is not goal-directed. It's just communicative.
Interesting.
And you may not care about how other people respond, right? You might not care about pissing them off or doing anything else. You just think, this is the type of person I am, and that's how my type of person behaves, and screw you guys, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I didn't
So
like...
yeah, you asked, what's the difference between values and beliefs? So, that's the traditional model is values is about how you think should be. Where you want to take things, whereas belief is all about how you think things are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't really think about it that way. I had a different understanding of values. I thought values are things like, for example, how you treat your family members, or
Right.
how you handle, like how you prioritize things. Where does money sit in the hierarchy of priorities versus...
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this, what I was describing is the sort of economist's model of a human, and it is very simplified, right? And they will agree, when you actually look into, actually they'll call them preferences. When you look into that, there's a whole lot more complexity. There's sort of attitudes to the world. There's, what causes pain, what causes pleasure. There might be values, which we tend to think as being somewhat more elevated,
Mm-hmm.
So within that realm of preferences or desires, there might be a lot more complexity to how those work. But in a sense, you can describe them all as attitudes towards how you would like the world to be.
Mm.
And you order the possibilities in certain ways and make trade-offs. Yeah, so I posted something about this on the blog a while back.
Mm-hmm.
How do you change your beliefs? And I think it's a lot easier to get rid of beliefs that don't make any sense than it is to adopt new beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So, one way you can do it is you search through your memories and you try and figure out, where did I get this idea?
Mm-hmm.
And you find out it was just because of one experience you had when you were 5. And, you think about that a bit and you think, from an adult point of view, that doesn't really seem like a good reason for having that belief, right? So it's pretty easy then to just drop it.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least to begin letting it go, right? To sort of start letting it go and releasing it. But it's a lot harder to just pick something and say, it would be really convenient if I believed this.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go. Let's start believing that.
Right.
So, for example, from time to time, those of us who don't believe in life after death get bothered by the idea of not existing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's occurred to plenty of people, gee, it would be really convenient if I did just believe, in reincarnation or, some other thing that avoids being dead. But most people don't succeed in just choosing to believe in life after death.
Mm-hmm.
People do if they're brought up that way,
Mm-hmm.
or if they have certain kinds of religious experience, maybe. But if you're sort of a fairly rationalist, atheistic kind of person like I am, I don't even see how it would work to just choose to believe in life after death.
Mm-hmm.
That's like choosing to fly or something.
One of the thoughts I had was that it's almost as if beliefs have a life of their own, and that we are sort of like cells in a body. So you consider all the people who believe in the Bible, right? So one way to think about them is that they are all cells of a body called, Christians. And as far as the body is the collective is concerned, it doesn't really care too much about the happiness of the individual's member, as long as they believe in it, right?
Right.
And
so this was one of the this is where the idea of a meme came from, actually.
Right.
These days people use meme to mean something a little bit different, but originally it was like the idea version of a gene, where memes or ideas that could propagate themselves from one person to another would group together in a way that was mutually reinforcing and sort of encouraged propagation and survival.
Right.
So you get sort of meme bunches, just in the same way that you get gene bunches that make up, a species with individual members that work together really well for propagation and survival. So you get meme bunches that would stick together that would also sort of encourage their own propagation and survival. And your example of the Bible is a really good one because, it encourages people to go out and spread the word and it reinforces the importance of passing it on to your children. And,
and also
one of the other memes within the bunch is how terrible it's going to be if you give up your belief.
right.
That's the worst state to be in, that's apostasy and so on. So, you can see it all sort of hangs together to promote propagation and survival.
Because beliefs ultimately don't exist unless there are people who believe in them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, so that's part of what inspired the original idea of the meme, is that there's got to be a sort of natural selection going on, where, ideas that aren't good at sticking around don't stick around.
Right.
They disappear. People drop them and move on to something else.
So the interesting thing about that is that, ideas that stick around, right? An idea that sticks around has certain attributes, like such as stickiness in one's own mind and how quickly they propagate, those sort of things. But notice that the one thing that's missing is truth value, like
Right.
right. Whether the
And
beliefs,
so there's a reason to think that truth value would be important. People who believe things that are false tend to be less successful, maybe get eaten by a tiger, whatever.
right.
So it comes in there, but you're quite right that it looks like there ought to be a lot of other factors besides truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you say, stickiness, right? An idea that sticks in your head and it's hard to figure out, right? Which has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. It might be something else about what makes it compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Ideas that are easy to communicate.
Right.
It's very easy to explain it to yourself or to other people, and again, that has nothing much to do with whether it's true. Mm-hmm. It's just whether it fits into a nice slogan or something like that.
Oh no, I was just kind of summarizing why it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
That section of the talk. So why is it difficult to change beliefs, right? So I mean, we kind of discussed a couple of reasons, and in one of the posts I was talking about how the cognitive dissonance, right, and that it's actually studied by psychologists by experimenting, putting people through the MRI scans and looking at the activity when they are being presented with belief that when the people are presented with the belief that they believe, right, was their core the beliefs, the brain activates in a particular way into the reaction of that when you're presented with something familiar that you believe. But when people are presented with a contradictory belief, that part, the analyzing part of the brain, it's just that part doesn't ever turn on, which means that we're blocking we're so into our belief that we are blocking all other possibilities, that the free will part, like that belief seems to be the only right. And I think the concept was born after the in the 50s, where it was supposed to be the end of the world, and there were a group of people, kind of like a sect, who believed in that, and who went to a field and started doing their sort of ceremony, just before they die, sort of thing, and observing, waiting for the storm to come and for the sky to part, and then nothing happened. It was a really peaceful day. So, like, what would you expect people, it's their life was granted the second time to them, right? Like the rational emotional reaction when we just be happy, be happy and just like go and, hang out with your friends and just celebrate life. But actually when I get really upset because like how, we believe in something and like why would it not happen? And, they're reporting that, like a couple people cried over not, the end of the world not happening. And then, and this kind of illustrates the part of that when we're presented with the contradictory belief, we, that the part of our brain that is responsible for building our core belief that we believe starts attacking that new belief to the point when these people at the end of the day were saying that, the only reason why the end of the world didn't happen was because we believed. By our prayers, the world will be changed. So the beliefs, in order to survive, our core beliefs, are protecting themselves by.
There's a lot of beliefs that are connected to our identity. You know, we don't think they're just about sort of how the world works, but they are also about us, the type of person we are. And those beliefs seem to be very hard to change. As you say, you know, you think of yourself as an atheist, and that really comes as a whole package deal, right? Because you've probably got a bunch of sort of model exemplary atheists in your head. You know, your atheist saints, if you like, what those people were like.
Yep.
And you know, and there's all these typical things that atheists believe. And so it's a package deal, and it's very hard to give up on any of that when you think of part of your identity as, you know, I'm an atheist. That's the kind of person I am. And I totally agree about this. Actually, this is something which, as I've sort of got older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I've become much more aware of. It is, you know, when is it that I'm believing and acting on those beliefs that are really just part of a package that I sort of bought into. So yeah, I'm an atheist. I don't think there's a God, but that's like one really narrow, specific sort of claim, right?
Right.
I don't think there's a God. But then there's the whole sort of package about what goes around that, what atheists are like, and all this other stuff. And so I want to be really wary about when I'm sort of buying into something just because it was part of the package. It's not really something that I ever thought about or ever reasoned my way to. It's actually, you know, I'm a libertarian as well, or at least I always thought of myself as a libertarian. And there it's much clearer, right? You can boil libertarianism down to just a few fairly simple claims, but then there's all this whole history of libertarianism as a political movement and the things that libertarians believe. And there's really a whole lot of stuff in there that when I think about it a bit more clearly, I think, I don't know, or I don't care. And I don't want to be committed to that.
Right. Is what happens when you have an emotional reaction, like I did. So it's from a podcast that talks about free will. You know, so say when you're driving down the road, and you don't have a navigation system, just driving down, and you know there's an exit that's coming up that you are trying to find, but before you know it, you are at a dead end. So you turn around and go back, and then you find the exit you missed, but you didn't see it when you were driving down. Now, did you have free will to take the exit? You know, I mean, in a sense you did, right? Because the exit was there. You had the potential of seeing it, but you didn't see it. So, you know, free will is not really a yes or no question. It's really more nuanced than that, right? You have to first become aware of another choice before you can even consider taking it.
Yeah.
And then second, this is the second part is interesting. Say you driving down the same road, and you spotted the exit, but by the time you spotted it, your car was going too fast to make the exit, so you end up overshooting it anyway, and then turning around. So in this case, you had awareness, right? But the momentum of your car is such that it's impossible for you to make that choice. And so, you know, the momentum is really represents our belief system and the emotional charge behind it, right? So in the moment of me reacting emotionally to a situation, unless I slow it down and have enough self-awareness to become aware that I have choices in how I act, and also spot it early enough so that my emotion doesn't carry me over the threshold, and I can stop it in time, then I can't really be said to have free choice.
And it gets complicated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was there a point where you could have bailed out? You know, part of our mind. Sometimes it's the part that you guys have been talking about is your inner voice. You know, that talks to you in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But part of your mind is sitting there, sort of watching what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
and editing. You know, it's the bit that puts the brakes on when you're about to do something stupid or something that it thinks will be embarrassing, right? That's inhibition in social situations
Mm-hmm.
where you want to say something but you can't,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's a supervisor sitting there ready to put the brakes on. And that, I think that often is part of what people mean by free will. It's the bit that sort of decides whether you will do something or you won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, sitting in that meeting where you flipped out of it, was there a point where that part of your mind could have put the brakes on and maybe chose not to, right? Or,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, didn't shout loud enough or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What do you
well,
think?
it happened
Could
really.
you have bailed out halfway into your rant?
So this is kind of goes into the whole self-help. You know, why self-help doesn't really work. It's because they describe what you ought to be. You know, how you should behave. You know, things like, you know, don't take things personally. You know, it's not all about
Right.
you.
How do you do that?
Right. Like when
Somebody calls you an idiot.
right.
Right, I'm not supposed to take that personally. He's probably just ups. So that's how you do it, actually. I was almost sort of starting to do it.
Right.
You start to explain his behavior in terms of something that has nothing to do with you.
Right. And it's often close
But
to the
you know,
truth.
your point is, it's you've got to get the emotional side on board with it, right?
Right. Hidden assumptions that I've had all along was that I'm looking for that thing that will solve my problem. You know, the
Right.
the paragraph or the drug or whatever it is that if I take it, I'll suddenly see the world in a different way. Right.
Mhm.
But now I think about it, it's almost like looking up ways to work out, right? I say I want to get become more healthy and fit, right? I can look up all the routines that go to the gym, right? I can figure out all the sets and just read up on the latest fitness theory, but nothing is going to, no amount of reading and thinking or learning is going to do it for me.
Yeah. In a sense, one day of doing the worst available exercise program
Mm-hmm.
would be better than 100 days of reading about the best exercise programs.
Mm-hmm. It's like going to the gym, right? I'm not going to expect a result in a week or a month. So why am I expecting the same thing from my mind? There's no reason to believe that I can just change this whole pattern of behavior just because I read something or because I've been trying really hard.
Right.
Yeah, the results is not immediate. So then what happens is that when I don't get the results I want, I say, well, this isn't working. I'm gonna try something else, right? But that's really not a rational response, not a correct way to respond to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of this, and I think that I thought about things in a similar way in the past, and I've been gradually shifting to a much more evolutionary sort of view of these things, where improving yourself and improving your own life is a much more step-by-step, day-to-day process. It's incremental, and a lot of it is about what you actually do, rather than necessarily what you think or believe or anything else like that. I mean, obviously those things have to go together as well, right? You know, you've got to have your sort of beliefs organized in the right way, and you've got to be motivated in the right way in order to get the action. But then people fall into a sort of trap where they think they have to get their beliefs and their emotions sorted out first before they do sort of what they want to do, before they start living the way they want to live.
Right.
And I'm coming around to the view that actually maybe the right thing to do is just to start living the way you want to live. And, you know, your beliefs and emotions will come into train behind.
The side effects of schooling, right? We're taught for a better part of our formative years that, you know, ways to learn to do anything is in the books. The answers in the books. And the more books
You
read,
don't do anything for, what is it now? People finish college at the age of 22, 23, if they're lucky, I guess.
Right.
So they spend, you know, many years doing nothing, just reading about what it would be like to do something.
Right. Plus,
and then they do something at the end of that.
Right, and you know, the positive reinforcement and negative reinforcements throughout school years is, you know, whatever you read is, you know, you're evaluating your personal worth is based on what you can memorize from the books or make sense of, you know, what you absorbed from the books, and take a person's ability to absorb information and evaluate them based on that. You know, it's not a there's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on whose perspective you're looking at it from. I mean, from the perspective of society, you know, that wants a steady supply of knowledge workers, people who, you know, follow instructions and can execute on relatively complex ideas, tasks. This is perfectly a fine, you know, fine way to condition children. But from the perspective of, you know, the children themselves, perhaps not so good.
Yeah, as a model for sort of how to improve yourself and shape your own life, it's not a great one, right?
Right.
In all sorts of ways, you know, not just what we were talking about, but plenty of other things as well. I mean, it tends to be fairly authoritarian and arbitrary the way it works, and
Well, one of the first beliefs that I eventually ended up letting go because I became aware of it was this cultural identity of me being a Chinese. I grew up in Taiwan, and, you know, was conditioned to you know, over time, that these are the behaviors of a good Chinese person. And when I went to New Zealand, you know, that clashed with reality, in that my bag of beliefs and identity was no longer socially enforced. In fact, it was, you know, kind of like fish out of water. I didn't really know what to do. So eventually I sort of came to the realization that what I had accumulated was just a set of ideas. It wasn't the truth. But while you're in that society, while you're in the, you know, in the environment in which it is reinforced, it felt like the truth. It felt like concrete, you know, reality. Certain behaviors are socially encouraged. So when you live in a society, you know, it feels very real to you until you stepped outside of it. I think the similar sort of experience, you know, happens to anyone who sort of lived in a different culture for any extended periods of time, is that they realize that, you know, beliefs that they had about the world is not the truth, so to speak. Now, people can react to it differently. I mean, you know, that's not always the case, right? Some people actually retrench and go further into the identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, whether that's, I mean, obviously we are free to choose that. Free to choose. There's nothing wrong with that. It's, if you're happy with being, being that way, I mean, so in my example, if I'm, happy living out a life of a Chinese person or a New Zealander or whatever, and I have my bag of ideas that are associated with that, and it makes me feel good to follow those things, then I guess everybody's happy, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But the
Yeah,
thing,
you can come away with from an experience like that and think, okay, so now I see that it was all a bit more optional, that there's one way of doing things, there's another way of doing things. But at the end of the day, I'm sort of pretty happy with the way of doing things that I grew up with. That is a possibility. As you say, some people sort of bounce back in a very reactive way.
right.
Where it's not so much that they were happy with, what they grew up with, it's more that they're horrified by what everyone else is doing.
Right.
So they sort of get quite aggro about it, and I don't think that's a very good way to react, but yeah, that happens as well.
Right. Or, I mean, more commonly, it's more of a, sort of judging of other people. I think a lot of where racism comes in is you see people behaving in ways that are contradictory to your social conventions, and you immediately form a moral judgment about that because that's what you would do in your native culture. For example, if people don't take off their shoes coming into a Chinese or Asian family, it's considered very rude. Whereas a person who's doing that has no idea they're being rude and aren't trying to be rude. But an Asian person could get very upset about that. But I mean, is that really what are they upset about?
Right.
They're not. I mean, they have no reason to be upset at this person, right? I mean, they're upset at this person's. I guess when we start talking about terms like being sensitive to your culture, other people's culture values, and
or just being disrespectful in general, right?
Yeah.
For them, it's not even the culture. It's that the belief is that people, when it comes to your house, you should take off the shoes to show respect to the owner, right? And they don't even. I mean, I think most of people don't even know that it's conditioned by the culture because it seems so right.
Yeah,
it's the same. The same. In Russia, like you come into someone's house, you acknowledge everyone in the room, right? Or you take off the shoes. This is the respect. But before, even after living in America for like 8 years, for me it is real because it seems like that's what normal people would do. They would come to show respect, and like I take it personally if that doesn't happen. But to realize it's actually I never really had a free will to believe or not to believe it because that was the condition of the culture.
Now the question is, is that possible? Can we get to a place? Can anyone get to a place where they have no belief systems?
Yeah, so this this very much, actually it's not just the skeptics. I was going to say this reminds me a lot of the ancient skeptics, but I think there's a similar idea in Stoicism as well, and there's a similar idea in Buddhism too. And it goes something like this. I think this is more the ancient skeptic version. But so the ancient skeptics sort of followed along from Socrates, and Socrates famously said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." And they sort of took that claim quite seriously and strove to achieve a state of mind in which they didn't believe anything. And by that I mean, or they meant, they weren't certain of anything. They weren't committed to anything.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, if they wanted to sit down at a table, they had to, in some sense, believe that the table was there, right?
Right.
And that there was a chair to sit on, and, that they had arms and legs and a body and all that sort of thing.
Okay.
In some sense, they had to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way they described it was, towards any particular claim, they would withhold assent.
Mm-hmm.
So they might go along with it.
Right.
They might use it, just for now. It's all sort of temporary,
mm-hmm.
contingent propositions.
Mm-hmm.
They treat everything as something which they will discard
mm-hmm.
if something better comes along,
mm-hmm.
or if there seems more reason with something else. So they never believe in anything with certainty.
Mm-hmm. So
I think that's basically the idea. So they don't commit themselves to anything.
Right.
And they described it as this state of mind of withholding consent.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose internally it's supposed to seem a bit like, well, I don't know that there's a table there, but it looks like there's a table there. Let's just go with that for now.
Mm-hmm.
And if it turns out that's wrong, that's fine. We'll deal with that when it arises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a good. I think it's a good place to shoot for. But I obviously you have to take into account the difficulty in changing your beliefs. Similar to the idea of momentum.
Mm-hmm.
The speed at which you're driving down the road affects your ability to take the turn.
Mm-hmm.
How so I think that this approach of not believing everything 100%, always holding part of yourself back so that you can change your mind later, is a great way to avoid being trapped in a belief.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something to be said. There's something positive to be said about beliefs too, because I think beliefs really, just like everything else, every other mental mechanism that we evolved, existed for a reason. I'm thinking of is when you're doing any sort of creative things, whether it's doing a painting, or creating a startup or a business, right? There's no rational basis for which this painting should exist. You don't sit down and say, I thought about, the conditions of today, and it seems appropriate that I should do a painting of this kind, right? That doesn't happen. You just, any sort of creation, it's creating something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And that requires belief.
Right. Yeah, I think your example is right, sort of on target. Artists in particular get carried away.
Mm-hmm.
They have an emotional reaction or a drive to create something,
mm-hmm.
and they just let it go and
mm-hmm.
they make it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often when they produce their best, most interesting work.
Right.
And if they have this very non-committed sort of attitude that the skeptics were recommending,
yeah.
or this this very controlled, rational sort of attitude where the sort of director I was talking about earlier is always there with his foot hovering above the brake, ready to stand on it if
right.
If you start yelling at people or whatever.
Right.
Then it just doesn't work if you're an artist, right? You're not going to get creative work out of that. And maybe there are other areas too. And I'm just sort of thinking about other entrepreneurs and so on who were sort of notorious for going off at people.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it was that, insanity in some ways,
yeah,
which actually carried them through to creating something new, which is what entrepreneurs are really doing. They're creating something new you that hasn't been seen before.
Right.
So of course there's no rational argument for doing it at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to be something new and untried, and you won't know whether it made sense until afterwards.
Right. Right. So, this is kind of where, we live in a very interesting existence in which, the logical and the illogical and, the emotional and the rational side really have to work together instead of just favoring one over the other. I think the idea of, being a purely rational, like a Vulcan sort of thing,
Right.
it sounds like an interesting idea, but I mean, I get a sense you don't get a whole lot done if that were the case. And but on the other hand, if you let your emotions run, freely, then other things happen.
Right.
So I think, sort of bring it back to the belief systems, that is something that I think, is the key to it all, right? Is that you by looking at your belief systems, you can actually change that. If you want to achieve happiness or sort of control over your life, a sense of control over your life, it's best to look for those belief systems that don't depend on things that you have no control over. So for example, if I believe that, in order for me to be happy, I need to live in an environment, live in a country where everybody is, a libertarian, for example, right? If I have that belief, then I'm going to be very unhappy, because that's really not something I have control over. If my belief is that I need other people to behave in a certain way for me to be happy, then my happiness depends on those other people, doing what I want them to do. So that leads to kind of controlling behavior, which most likely will fail anyway. So, that's one of the metrics that I start to evaluate belief systems based on.
Yeah, it's just very based on the Stoics and Epictetus, who was saying that the only thing that we actually can control is our attitude to events, but we can't really control almost anything in our lives, right? So going from this, because I think many people live their lives in delusion that they can control stuff by money, and just that core belief that you can control your life.
It's just a matter of willpower,
you start
right?
building, right, and you start building like, how do I control my life? If I make a career and have a good career, that I'll be safe and I'll control, right? If I, if I have money, so it's always like your self-image is always based on the external things. So your life
maybe
becomes
maybe a specific family situation, right? Like
Yeah.
I will be happy if this happened.
right.
Yeah.
Just yeah, but this is really like the biggest illusion of all times, right? The thing that we can't control weather. We can't, like, if it's going to be the end of the world, we're not going to be able to control that, right? We can't control other people acting upon us, right? So it's in our power is to adjust our attitude, right? And I think just the word adjust the belief might not even be better
Right.
than creating a belief. You're
Right.
not right. The reason why you create a belief is because your current belief doesn't work in this particular setting, right? Instead, you're a Chinese person living in America, for example, like a non-Chinese community, then your belief about people coming to your house and not taking out their shoes will only result in your disappointment and anger and like the same emotional reactions, right? So you just adjust the belief because you can't change.
But I mean, at that point, I think people should be free to choose. If they, if choosing the identity, right, at a cost of the constant frustration is worth it to them, so be it, right? as long as it's a conscious choice, I think. When people feel, the suffering comes in when people feel like they don't have a choice, that they have no choice but to react to people offending them all the time.
Right.
That's a hellish existence.
Yeah, though, I think it really, internally, it really changes things when you realize I'm really unhappy every time people come to my house. And the reason is because I've chosen to identify with a set of values that makes me unhappy every time people come to my house, right? Once you realize that it is a choice, it's very hard to see the cause in the external world anymore. Before you know it's a choice, you think it's these people who keep their shoes on who are making me unhappy. But then after you actually see it as a choice, it just never looks quite the same way again.
Yeah, who was it which was the philosopher that said that you should choose?
I think this was Sartre in particular, but the existentialists in general were very big on this idea that there's everything that happens, but the way you feel about everything that happens, your attitude towards it, that's all you. That's within your control.
Yeah. I think, even in situations that I felt that I didn't have a choice at a time, right? If I later on decide that I did have a choice and I chose the action that I chose, it actually makes me feel better.
Yeah, that's right. It actually changes the way you feel about the past, right?
Right. The bad feelings associated with being forced into a choice or situation in which you perceive you have no choice is that of victimization, right? Things happen to me, I don't have a choice in it, so that makes me a victim, and victim doesn't feel good.